Well, good afternoon and good morning to many. I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm Forrest Harper. I am the president and CEO of INROADS, the nation's largest nonprofit on leadership development and also career pathways. It is exciting to hear and see everybody from the first session of the call this morning. Got a chance to hear Thomas Ransom, the all-star in terms of development and leadership over at Truist Bank. And also, wow, what a treat, Wes Moore. I heard him a couple of weeks ago, and just to hear him again on the things that he went through about diversity and just plain life's advice that you give to everybody. You're in for a treat today. We have a group of leaders that truly are authentic, realistic, candid, but also helpful about how we can take the discussion on diversity and tech and HBCUs to a whole new level. So I'd like to introduce them today to see what you're in store for. So first of all, I want to make sure that you get a chance to meet Molly Ford. So I'm going to ask Molly to come on and introduce herself at this point.
Thank you so much. I'm Molly Q. Ford, the Vice President of Global Equality Programs for Salesforce. So that means my day job is to make diversity, inclusion, and equality a reality for the culture of our employees, right? So trying to impact how Salesforce is living out a core value of equality.
Very good. Very good. And then I'm going to also ask that Thomas, you give sort of one more time an introduction for those who may not know you.
Forrest, I will cede all of my time to the wonderful Tracy Daniels at Truist, who will represent us here.
Okay, very good. Very good. So we know. So Tracy, I want to make sure we get an opportunity to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you. So Tracy Daniels, I'm the Chief Data Officer for Truist. So that means that my team and I manage all the analytic platforms that drive our data solutions across the company.
Excellent. Excellent. So see what I mean, everybody? If you were to go to LinkedIn, if you were to go to just Google these two outstanding leaders, you'll begin to read a lot more about their journey. And so one of the things I want to make sure of is that we help you understand today that it's not about where the journey starts. It's actually going throughout that journey and where you end. So what I'd like to do is start off by asking a simple question that centers around where is your company at this point focus and commitment around bringing talent into the organization to be able to fulfill the key roles that you have that are diverse. Tracy, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So Truist has a pretty public policy. Thomas actually talked about it a little bit earlier, right, around our goals to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we've got some pretty aggressive goals as a company to increase representation in our leadership ranks. Within technology, I have the pleasure of co-leading our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council with one of my teammates, Eduardo Joya, and we've got some pretty aggressive goals as well within our group to make sure that we bring in more talent in the way of Black, Hispanic, women representation into the technology ranks, and also make it a place and a destination that folks want to come, that they see that they can be successful and have really meaningful experiences with technology within our groups and organizations.
Great, great. And Molly, would you like to comment on that same question, please?
Absolutely. So for the past year, Salesforce has an aspirational goal that by 2023 to be 50% underrepresented communities. What does that mean? Black, Latinx, Indigenous, folks that identify as LGBTQ+, persons with disability, as well as military or veteran status. So 50% of our population. Since the murder of George Floyd, we've doubled down on our goals. And one of our goals has absolutely been to double the number of VP+ Black representation, and also to double our population of underrepresented minorities. So that is very much something we've done. Throughout our journey, Salesforce has doubled down on gender equality starting a few years ago, but we really wanted to be intentional to make an impact on how we're recruiting, attracting, and promoting and developing Black and Latinx talent in tech specifically.
Well, very good. I happen to have just a tremendous amount of respect for diverse talent in tech. And as a follow-up to those questions, I think those are two very strong, what I would call commitments by design and by action. It's not just a promise. And so I'm going to take you back a minute to follow up on these questions. In 2015, the tech industry sort of got caught with their hands in the cookie jar, indicating that the tech industry basically had less than 2% of their actual representation being Black and brown. They all committed to over $5 million, I'm sorry, about $532 million in terms of a commitment to diversity. Now, 5 years later, we see the progress, but where is there more room to grow at this point, would you say, about in the area of careers and diversity in tech?
Absolutely. Tech has a lot of work to do to help diversify. I think one of the biggest things that hurt tech is location, right? We were all saying everyone's got to be right here in Silicon Valley. And one thing COVID-19 has taught us is work can be from anywhere. The second thing, I do think education failed us, right? Meaning we weren't churning out the Black and brown Mark Zuckerbergs and Bill Gates, and I want to call out women as well, right? The Katherine Johnsons. We weren't churning those out within our community. There's an amazing NPR podcast that talks about what happened to women in coding. And I really like it because it reminds me of the movie Hidden Figures. And it talks about women at the start of computing and how computing was considered woman's work, right? It was a typist job. You were typing. And then as tech and computers became more analytical and statistical, right? Then it became, sorry, we're getting an echo. Statistical and analytical, then it became the work of men, right? And women were not attracted or groomed to be in the tech industry, right? And so education said, well, a prerequisite, once you show up to university, you need to know how to already code. You need to know how to already use a computer. But we knew that we were marketing computers. Like you look at how you market computers, you say the pink aisle or the blue aisle.
Right.
Back in the 80s, computers went on the blue aisle and it was a vehicle for video games, targeting men and boys, not girls. So think about that digital divide you're creating between not only gender, but also the racial divide, that we're not exposed to computers. And now studies will show kids need to be exposed to computers by the 4th grade in order to be competitive in this 21st century or 4th industrial revolution job market, right? So we really have a lot of makeup work to do in tech. Right. I think a lot of that is going to be, how we are very intentional, not blaming the pipeline, but being very intentional to go out and access Black, Latinx, and Indigenous talent.
Well, that's awesome. I'm gonna shift gears for just a second and ask about a focus that's centered around what concerns most of us, and that is how do you see your firm, your company, and the commitment they've made actually promoting diversity and equity? So we hear the announcements, and the example I will give is back a week after the unfortunate killing of George Floyd, we heard a flurry of announcements from Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies. Today, those announcements have amounted to over $7.5 billion going to be and inclusion. My question to you has to do with how do we turn those dollars into actual action that a year from today we will see growth by intention, like you said, Molly, into a real evidence that it's working. Let me start with you, Tracy, to figure out what your thoughts are on those dollars. $7 billion have been committed so far.
Yeah, I mean, I love the words that we used around intention, right? This isn't going to happen because of, hope and pure aspiration. So you see, I think, companies starting to put really focused efforts into programs with metrics, right, that drive the expected outcomes. So, for example, we are looking at multidisciplinary things. So we've got the hiring goal that we talked about going from, 12% to 15% in terms of, increased representation at our senior leader. We announced today Truist did donations for supporting nonprofit efforts in the community, right? Another $40 million worth of innovation funds that are focused specifically on ethnically and racially diverse and women-owned businesses and driving outcomes, looking for specific outcomes from those types of funds. The conversation that Thomas had earlier with Wes, right, talking about investments not only in the pipeline and hiring, but the support services around getting students to finish up and graduate so that they can actually enter the workforce. So we're looking at multidisciplinary things that drive actual action. Last thing I would say is, and we continue to drive inclusive experiences once you enter our companies, right? So we want you to stay, we want you to have, a really great experience and a career. And so really working on driving an inclusive experience once you enter, that you have mentorship, you have resource groups that you can join, that we are looking at your development for, opportunities to give you real experiences on platforms. So trying to, again, make sure that it's not a one and a done, it's a ongoing relationship, and that it follows through with metrics that we're driving for our companies.
Molly, you want to add any more comment to that one, of that $7 billion that's out there today in commitment?
Absolutely. It's funny, we want to make sure we're not being performative, right? Not just responding with a tweet or blacking out our social media pages for a day, but what is the actual action that a company is taking with real commitment and dollars behind it? And I love what Tracy said. It doesn't stop once we recruit you, right? So how are we investing in our Black and Latinx talent? And for us, it's mentorship programs, development programs, and financially empowering our employee resource groups. So we have these employee resource groups, and we're all seeing the headlines of Black employees are doing the work of diversity and inclusion as a side job, but you're not being compensated for it, right? So we're very intentional that our financially empowered employee resource groups can be on the front lines of their community. So as an example, as we built out our racial equality and justice task force, we consulted with our Black employee resource group. What are your ideas? What do you think is happening? And more importantly, how are you experiencing Salesforce, right? Getting that input from them, but not putting the burden of the job. That's our job to go do the work, right? Another thing we did this year is we gave our equality groups or employee resource groups a spot bonus, right? We actually financially compensated them for all the work they're doing. Our employee resource groups can use volunteer time off. We call it VTO. That's 56 hours a year. Every employee can be out volunteering with a nonprofit, coaching a little league, being a little league team, being a mentor. And we're saying we want to pay you for your time and your input in building a more diverse and inclusive company. So it really is about putting dollars behind these programs, making sure you're actually investing in that talent.
Right. I really admire you bringing up the point about really checking in with the ERGs to give you sort of guidance as to do. And I know, Tracy, you do the same thing. So if you want to comment on what engagement you've had with ERGs that Molly mentioned, you want to make a comment about those and how you're working with them to decide?
Absolutely. One of the things I was most impressed with was sort of immediately after the death of Mr. Floyd, Kelly King took an opportunity to actually come to the resource groups, and he spent a tremendous amount of time listening. He's come back since then to have conversations and share with us the types of programs that Truist is putting into place in response to driving really equity across Truist and into our communities. Our resource groups are absolutely the place where teammates can join to really make a difference. And one of the things we're also encouraging is you don't have to be Black to join the Black resource group. You don't have to be LGBT to join that, right? The sense of allyship and really participation and engagement by all our teammates to really further the cause. Like, that is truly an inclusive environment. So absolutely, I think our resource groups are a sense of power and ideas and really engagement for all of our teammates with interest.
Well, I really want to applaud you both on that item because in my own experience, I started the first African-American ERG at Pfizer some 25 years ago, before this was gray. And one of the things that became very evident was that not only could we affect the community by giving advice to the company, but also the company in their overall growth in business development. I recall very vividly that when we launched a product from the pharmaceutical giant Pfizer at the time, we did not do any clinical trials on African Americans from not just African American, but from African American universities, HBCUs, that had medical schools like Howard University or Florida A&M or Meharry or Morehouse. But the ERG weighed in, and we then went back and awarded those institutions, the Morehouse, the Howard of the world, research money to do clinical trials. And because of that, the ERG made that recommendation. Those universities are now doing more clinical trials, just like any other major medical school that would do it. But the two of you brought up that point about you're checking in with your ERGs to be assets to what you're doing about diversity. So let's shift the discussion to really about tech for just a second around what you see as opportunities at this point. How would you say your companies, Salesforce and Truist, are using technology to promote diversity and equity? I'll start with you, Tracy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things I talked about was also the environment, right? So creating this inclusive environment. So one of the things we did was we actually brought in a leader, Dr. Brandeis Marshall, who's a respected scholar in diversity and technology and a data scientist. And she came in and talked to hundreds of data scientists and data analysts that we have in our company around being aware of algorithmic bias, right? So the idea that your data could have bias in it, and as you employ machine learning and artificial intelligence, you want to make sure that you're asking questions about the data and the quality and how that drives your decision making. So am I adversely affecting a population or not? Is there unconscious bias? How would a persona who's representing a certain demographic population interact with this tool? We did that because we wanted everybody thinking about inclusion and diversity and equity and outcome. And we wanted to make sure that as we're rolling out technological solutions, that we're doing it in a way that really supports our community, right? And really services our clients in the best way without bias. So that's just an example of how, we're looking at the underpinnings of our technology to make sure that as we do this, we're doing it in a way that, again, promotes equity.
A few things Salesforce is doing in the same area. We spun up 2 years ago under Tony Profit and Paula Goldman, the Office of Ethical and Humane Use. And that for us is really an evaluation of, we're saying technology is inherently not good nor bad. It's how you use it. So making sure that we are being responsible citizens of the world and how we are using our products and how our community uses our products. Then we're also building on AI. We have a mentoring program, right? Because we feel like a real opportunity for Black talent in tech is through mentorship and sponsorship, right? And not just mentorship if we're going to have a coffee, but who's talking about you not in the room, who's advocating for your career. So we've been on a journey to mentor matching, a program started by our Bold Force ERG in New York. And now we're actually going to apply some AI technology to that mentor match. So now it's not about just randomly matching you with someone, but breaking job descriptions down to core competencies. And what are the skills necessary to get to the next level? And what is your actual career path, your journey, your growth? But who do you need to meet along the way? And making sure that that employee then touches a leader at a skip level, a rank or so above. So we're trying to use AI technology to match. Who do we match our mentor matching with? How do we make sponsorship relationships work? who should you call on as you advance through the ladder of the organization? The other thing is we're sipping our own champagne. I use a Salesforce instance just like my customers do. I use one to manage my employee resource groups. What's their budget? What was the feedback score on their event? And basically an instance of Salesforce that I can manage my programming, my budget, and drive value. So doing a lot. And then last I'd say is probably app engagement. We're trying to build an app for our recruiting experience. So we call it Insiders. You've got an interview, you're coming on Salesforce, you can go in the app and say, I want to find out more information about the culture, or I want to meet an employee, or I want to set up time to talk to someone. Or you could say, I'm a person with disability, I'm in the need of services, right? How do you get an accommodation? We're trying to make that an app-based experience so your candidacy experience matches your everyday life. We're all going to apps to either order food or get a review on a restaurant or tickets for an event. We're trying to replicate that same experience when you walk through Salesforce.
Thank you so much. So let's take a imaginary trip. Let's say that you've been invited, Molly and Tracy, to speak with who your audience is now, but on the campus of an HBCU. You've been there many, many times, and you want to have a candid conversation of what will prepare the new curriculum for the future for tech and diverse talent that you're looking for in your company. What are the top 2 bits of advice would you give to the faculty as they design the curriculums for the future? What are those things that you would say to each student coming into Salesforce or into Truist would need to have as a part of the curriculum? You can go, Tracy.
I'll start. Yeah, sure, I'll start. So, for me, there's a couple of things. There's always the technical foundation, right? And ways for students to learn to also deepen that technical acumen, self-study as well as part of the curriculum. And the reason I say that is I remember having this conversation with a gentleman around his teammates trying to learn a new technology, TensorFlow, back in the day. And the team came to him and was like, hey, we need this big course. We need to do all these different things. And this is how we're going to learn TensorFlow. And his point to them was, my 13-year-old watches a video on YouTube and figures out, TensorFlow. But it's constantly learning, right, the new technologies, right? That curiosity to keep going further and learning new things is what's really impossible. Not the technology itself, because that'll change at the speed of light. It's the curiosity to keep learning and the acumen to start to pick up new and different skills. And then I would say it's multidisciplinary, right? Because I don't just need you to be a fantastic technologist. I need you to connect dots. I need you to think design thinking, like Molly said, about, how are we going to use this technology and what's the experience we're trying to drive? We want people who are going to be problem solvers and do it from multidisciplinary ways. So you could be an economics major, you can be a liberal arts major, you could be a music major. How do you bring that concept? How do you bring those learnings to light to really create new and different technologies that are out there? I'd love for somebody to figure out an amazing banking application that was basically TikTok videos of, to keep people coming back and gamify it, right? So those experiences that you can bring from different places and that constant curiosity to go deep on the technology, I think are really important for the future.
That's great insight. And I just want to build on that. For me, I would say for faculty, it's all about preparing students for next generation jobs, right? And critical thinking skills as much as you can provide them with that. But for the students, it's that intellectual curiosity that Tracy talked about. How are you always learning and evolving? What are the internships you can get under your belt, right? What are the experiences you can learn? And then I do not want to devalue just being good citizens of the world. How are you giving back? How are you volunteering? How are you lifting as you climb? Anything you can show to demonstrate values alignment with our company. We have a core value of not only quality, but giving back. So what is it you've done to provide for other generations or underserved communities?
So I know we have about 5 minutes left. I could talk with these brilliant ladies for the next 3 hours. I'm going to advance 2 questions, so it gives whoever's going second the chance to think about the other 2. But you're so good on your feet that both of you will be able to do this. So what I'd like to ask, we want to give everybody who's listening, what is your call to action that you'd like to leave the audience with and leave our visitors with today? That's one. But the one I want to ask you about, what is the first one I'd like to ask you about would be the following. Sadly enough, when COVID-19 happened in the midst of last spring at its biggest point, we sent a lot of students back home anticipating remote learning and also all the things that would need for technology. That means the HBCUs emptied their doors and they went home. We at INROADS, we did a survey. And one of the questions we asked the students what they were coping with, one of the answers we got back with, number one was inconsistent connectivity and access to technology to continue their distant learning, okay? So sadly enough, we just saw a report yesterday that in the city of New York, in one borough, 6,000 students are not engaging in technology in their schoolwork. What would be your solution from your company that you may be doing right now that could help out with those 6,000 students? P&G is leading a campaign around 1 million devices and connectivity to help students. But what would be your thought around a big idea that could help with that problem? And then you can also give your call to action, what you want them to do.
I love
Hey,
it.
it's Trace. I'll start. So just as you mentioned, Truist is actually doing that very thing, right? Providing laptops to students and communities so that they have equipment, and then working with telecom providers around connectivity, because that's sort of it's interesting. It's almost the Maslow's hierarchy of needs these days in the digital connected world, right? Which is make the connections available, make the equipment available so folks have that basic need met and can then do other things from there. The big idea would be for us to actually create infrastructure for that so that we aren't reliant on individual companies sort of coming up with this idea, but making this a much more of an infrastructure project on behalf of the United States in not only cities, but rural areas. It should be like a utility, in my opinion.
Right.
And then maybe to the students in terms of, the piece of advice. The one thing I think of sometimes when I look back at my career and I think about what did I wish I knew, back in the day, I would say take risks, right? Take some big risks in your career early and often, quite frankly. Get some muscle memory of being uncomfortable because I think that's where you learn and grow the most. So I take jobs that I have no idea how I'm going to do it. I move into cities I have never lived before. I join teams where I don't know people. Get uncomfortable with taking risks and growing in that space of uncomfortableness.
Okay. Molly closes out.
Awesome. So Salesforce has donated $20 million to help schools reopen safely. What does that mean? That $20 million also went to food insecure communities in Oakland and San Francisco, our hometown where we're headquartered. So we've donated to schools. We have a program that's simply called Circle the School. And that is where you show up to the principal and ask, what do you need? Salesforce funds a principal's discretionary fund. That means not what the district said or the state said, what does that principal need? We've seen principals use that fund for dental care for students, as well as buying tech equipment for students. So as part of this $20 million donation to help schools reopen, we're partnering with Steph and Aisha Curry's Eat, Play, Run organization. And that's specifically making sure that children that would get their meals at school are also getting their meals now that they're home for COVID-19. My call to action for the students, I would just say sky's the limit. I really believe in these next generations that they are quickly going to lead. They are taking on roles and jobs that have aligned to their passions, that are meaningful to who they are. They have a desire to give back. And I would just say, be values driven in everything you do, and really sky's the limit for this. I love that quote now that says, I'm my ancestors' wildest dreams. You know, my dad growing up in Callion, Arkansas, you know, he never thought I'd be where I am today, right? And I can't wait to see what this next generation accomplishes as well.
Fantastic. Well, I have been overwhelmingly blessed with these two giants and these two pioneers of what they mean. You can see they're authentic, they're passionate. We could go on, but we do have another session. And the call to action that I have for all of you, as much as we're seeing in the disparity of what's happening in the midst of two twin pandemics, don't lose hope. Romans 8:27 says, get ready for the overflow of blessings. You've heard some blessings on this call today. Take advantage of them. Between the two giant companies, between Truist and Salesforce, they're ready to help you. They're ready to help our HBCUs accept the help, and let's move forward. So I want to thank Tracy. I want to thank Molly. I want to thank also Thomas and all the efforts of us putting this on today. And so what I'd like to do is just next on the agenda, please stay tuned for a panel discussion that really take it to the next level on innovation and transforming these industries. We'll take a 10-minute break, probably now a 7-minute break, and then it'll begin at 11:50. So thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Molly. All the best to everybody on the call. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.